Well, I know we have some people giving blood, so as people come, as people go, I totally understand. It's one of those things. So currently we are going through a series called The Chosen, kind of a show that's really focused more so on the disciples. And this last episode was really focused on the healings where John the Baptist now comes in, and yet they find also a man who has demons possessing him. And he is overwhelmed by some of these spirits that are within him. But it also draws us back into some of the concerns that the disciples had that we ourselves might have. But before I go too far into this, I'll just ask the question, what stood out to you and what did you appreciate about the episode?
Didn't see that. I love that.
What in particular?
Well, when he had thrown Simon the Zealot's sacred sword or weapon into the river, which was actually a pond.
Yeah.
Okay. And he looked at Simon and said, "You didn't see that?"
Absolutely. So Simon the Zealot now joins Jesus and his group, and zealots were known to be assassins. And so he had been trained for several years to how to kill. And yet Jesus, when he comes to join, takes his sword, throws it in the river or pond or lake or whatever it may be, and says that's not going to be needed. I think for many of us, we sometimes think that Jesus is wanting me to do this, wanting me to have this in my life. And yet when Jesus actually comes to us, he says, nope, life is changing. We're going in this direction.
I found it interesting that Simon the Zealot is the first one that Jesus didn't ask for him to follow.
At least not yet.
No, Simon assumed that I'm following you.
He did, but he hasn't spoken those words is what I'm getting at. He still may in the future.
He may.
But yeah, you're right. He is the first one who did not go through that traditional kind of thinking of, well, Jesus asking or telling, follow me. And a person responding with, yes, I will, or what's coming. Anything else stood out to you?
Nancy had some questions around Mary in the Jericho bar.
Okay.
They didn't actually show her buying alcohol.
Nope.
But it was kind of implied that she was drinking and she had money this time.
Yeah. So Mary kind of
Stumbles.
Yeah, because of, I'll say, the echoes of her past. She's confronted with some of the things that have already transpired in her life. And so she finds herself going down the same path, going into familiar environment of a bar where she had gone to before. And yet she's struggling with what she has now known with Jesus and what it is that is familiar to her. I think it's sometimes hard for many of us when we have a life that we've known, when we have a familiarity, a routine, friends and people who are of our, I'll just say, old way, and then to do something anew. How does that work? What does that look like? And how do we, quote, break our bad habits? Sometimes that's easier said than done. And sometimes you need others around you, even when they come and welcome you and greet you in such kind ways. Because you saw how the bartender, or was it Jethro, welcomed him or welcomed her back into the bar. Mary, you look fantastic. You look great. He has seen a change, and yet she still is struggling.
He didn't call her Mary, he called her Lord.
Oh, did he call her Lilith? Yeah. Okay, so her former name.
Really? Yeah. Because that was
her old name that she went by. No, we don't know exactly. So in the episode, we did see a lot of, I'll say, memories that had kind of echoed back, because whenever we see the Roman soldiers coming by and experiencing some of maybe the trauma that she has experienced, but we don't know what that is exactly. And they haven't really made it clear, but just that it's haunting her.
I suspect that Matthew was going to play a big part in whatever she's getting into. That's why Jesus wanted to go along with Simon. Because he said, remember that verse.
Yep.
That he has been helping her to learn.
Yeah, we see Jesus going, and when Matthew is on the outside saying, "Can I come too?" And Simon Peter says, "I don't need you, I'll go alone." I think he was also teaching us as listeners, as watchers. Sometimes we need to recognize what we feel like we don't need help with. Sometimes it can help to have a second set of hands, have that other perspective, especially someone who's vastly different than us. Jesus has gathered together disciples from different realms, different jobs, different experiences, and yet they continually rub each other the wrong way. They help each other grow.
Yes.
They help each other become polished. And yet, when we do go through that rubbing, it ruffles our feathers. It gets us kind of, oh, I don't like this person. I don't like those words that you're saying to me. I don't like these things. And yet, you know that they're somewhat right.
I found it comical that Matthew brought his spoon, and the guy with the thing that was just showed up.
Yep. So we had a man who is possessed by a demon enter into the camp and seemed to be ready to attack. And yet there were only 2 men and 2 women. And so the men go to protect. One grabs a knife, Thomas does. But then Matthew grabs what was closest to him, a spoon.
Maybe he thought he was the tip.
What I kept thinking is, I wonder if he's thinking of his childhood. How many times would his mother grab the spoon and on the butt? And that's what he feared the most. So if that's what he feared the most, let's take it and let's use it and strike the fear in someone else.
That was a little bit of comic relief.
It was a little comic. Yet, do you remember the demon-possessed man? What was the name of the demon? Do you remember? Yeah? But he also gave his rank.
7th Legion or something.
7th knight in the Legion.
7th night?
7th knight.
7th night.
As in knight with a K. Yes. So here they're talking about the legion of angels that have fallen from heaven and where they are from. Keep in mind, especially at this time, we're talking a lot about the ancient world. And so they would often refer and think of things in the military in king on down kind of mentalities. Democracy, republics are a rather new idea, yet one that we sometimes struggle with even today. How does this work? What does this look like? What does this mean for us to be living it out? It's not as bad as this. At least you're not oppressed by these things, and yet we still struggle. Even today, there are evil spirits that will possess us. Yet we often will name them differently. Addictions, illnesses, we still call them, but they're different things, different names. We heal them in different ways. But we also need to recognize that in the inside, Mary is continually reaching out to the man and asking one question over and over again. What is your name?
Trying to get to his birth name.
What is your name? Yep, precisely. That there's a human inside of that person. So the person who is dirty, the person who is disheveled, the person who seems to not have their life together, still is a person. It's something that many of us still struggle with, though, today. We go driving down the streets and someone honks their horn at us and we start thinking, well, that person's just rude. Or we look at someone on the side of the road and they're dirty from being homeless, and we think, oh, so foolish, they don't have their life together at all. Yet if you ever sat down at a homeless shelter to eat a meal and began talking to someone, you begin to recognize how similar your lives may be. The differences that we have are not very many. One choice, one decision, one moment in your life can determine whether you stay in your home or whether you are removed from your home, whether you have a job or whether you lose your job. It's something to recognize that Mary sees and knows that there is a person buried beneath that demon because she was there. She had that experience. In the midst of our lives, there are often going to be moments that we have to endure, that we are able to overcome, we're able to grow, we're able to heal, but then someone else, a friend, family, or even someone else in the world is experiencing maybe the same or something similar to it. And you're able to reach out. Sometimes that's hard. Did you see the struggle that Mary had to be able to say, I can face this, I can do this? Everyone was hiding, everyone was taking a step back, but Mary was the one who took a step forward. She was the first one to act and move. Yep. When it was all done, she needed to go and heal herself. Instead, she ran. That's what she felt like she needed to do. But Jesus sees that and says, Ramira, go after her.
He took charge of the situation. He assigned, kind of like our CPR course, with somebody that's
Yeah, very much so.
Like somebody that's 911, somebody going to AED.
Yep.
Or you start resuscitation.
Yeah. Timely class, wasn't it?
There was a class.
But Raymond really didn't follow through on all that. She didn't stick with it.
Well, she did go follow up, but only once.
Right.
And yet then she left. Sometimes we do that too. Oh, I read this book of the Bible. I read this chapter. I know this lesson. I can move on from it. I know this lesson and this is what I should learn from it. But what if we read that lesson again now and be able to hear it again and learn more fully, more deeply what it was all about? And even Ramira is learning what it means to be a disciple. How much do you reach out to someone? How much do you let them go and allow them to come to you? Sometimes that's a hard dance, and it's hard to know.
The two healings were what I really took away from this episode.
Sure.
How Jesus approached the ones to be healed. And like the one man who hadn't walked for 38 years.
38 years, Jesse.
And we were analyzing that, how he could have gotten down to the water. That's another story. But Jesus knelt down to him, looked him directly in the eye, and said, "What is your name?" And he asked him that several times. And then he says, "Do you want to be healed?" And that was a difficult question for that man to answer. I was surprised at that.
Yeah.
But he really had to struggle with that question in order to come up with it. Oh, he struggled with that.
After 38 years and you beginning to lose hope, he gave up on what the possibility was. After so long of being in pain and suffering, you begin to think that this is going to be a part of me. After it becomes a part of you, it becomes your identity. It becomes what you are known for. And yet, then you need someone to help you break out of that mindset and ask you the tough questions, kind of like I had in my sermon today. What are you doing? Is this something you really want? Or are you simply going through the motions?
Well, John the Baptist's reaction after Jesus kicked the lad out.
So we have John the Baptist and Jesus, remember they're cousins, walking into the camp, and the man who was demon possessed was still standing in front of the four. But how did Jesus approach it?
He was actually choking Simon the Zealot.
He was choking Simon the Zealot.
See, Jesus came running up behind him and said, "Out.
Get out!" And what happened?
John goes, "Yes!"
John the Baptist stands up and goes, "Yes!" Because the demon had left.
He'd been wanting to see a miracle.
He had, and he didn't know if he'd ever would. Yeah.
John the Baptist and Jesus were able to talk intimately.
Very much so.
More so than just friends.
Yeah.
Cousins.
Well, they're family.
And John the Baptist seemed to know what God's plan was for Jesus. So that was probably the common thread that was there for them.
So keep in mind, John the Baptist had learned from his father what it was he was going to be doing. Because when his mother, Elizabeth, was with child, Zechariah, his father, was mute. He could not speak. And so there was a prophecy that was given by the angel saying that Elizabeth would have a child in her old age and that he would prepare the way of the Messiah. And his name shall be John. So he knew full well what it was going to be. He knew what Jesus was capable of doing. And when, oh, when was Jesus going to start? It's been 30 years that you've been in this world. When are you going to start preaching? When are you going to start asking the tough questions? When are you going to start challenging some of these things? When are you going to start acting like I am and upsetting the apple cart? Turning things over. And Jesus started, but he said, that's not my way. I'm going to tell stories to those who are willing to hear. I'm going to share this message with those who are willing to listen. But those who refuse, those who close their ears, no. It's not yet my time. It's something, though, for us to wrestle with. It's who in your own life is encouraging you in your faith? Family, friends. Sometimes family, like John and Jesus, are able to poke, prod, because they know you, they've known you for longer, and they know some of your weaknesses and strengths. They know how to push your buttons. And sometimes that's a bad thing. And sometimes that can be a good thing. When Jesus first started in his ministry, it was his own mother who said, do whatever he tells you to do. Basically, it's your time. Act. Sometimes our parents were the ones in our own faith to say, it's time to go and do this. We're going to church. You're going to Sunday school. You're going to confirmation. And it becomes this habit where you have to. But it is our sincere hope that in the midst of your experience, in the midst of building those relationships and learning who God is, that you would actually grow to want to come to church, to experience God's presence, to know God's love and share God's love. Doesn't mean you're going to have it perfectly. It doesn't mean that you're going to be acting just like Jesus or just like John the Baptist. It doesn't mean that you're only going to be able to eat locusts and wild honey. But it will cause you to reflect and hopefully see what you need to change in your life and even challenge you in new ways.
This video scattered my idea of John the Baptist. I thought he would be a broad-shouldered man, kind of tall.
Oh.
The animal skins there.
Sure.
Deep voice.
You were thinking big burly guy.
Yeah. But here comes this skinny little guy.
Skinny little scrawny guy, yep.
I can't be John the Baptist.
One of the things I have appreciated about the director of this is he does challenge our previous ideas. But that's also part of the creative licensing of going from a book, a story, and putting it into video. Because now we have a face, even if it's an actor's face, of who this person is. It doesn't line up. It doesn't make sense. And there are people who will, well, this vehemently does not agree with what's in my mind. I thought Jesus would look like this. I thought he'd have blonde hair, blue eyes, it would be long and flowing, and he'd have a white gown and going like this wherever he goes. What's that?
Like you with long hair.
Exactly. And yet, he continually comes back and says, let's reimagine these. Let's think about the disciples as actual people. What if they had a disability, a limp? What if they had another ability, autism? Something that you can still function, you can still be a contributing member of the group, but there's a break, a distinction between you and the others because others keep saying, you're not right. And as Matthew himself said, here's the world. I feel like I'm over here. That we continually can come back to and see humanity in the disciples and in Jesus. It's interesting, though, that you say that when you saw John the Baptist, you kept thinking, no, he shouldn't be some scrawny guy. And yet, when you think about it, his diet would not be very nutritious. It wouldn't allow him to grow. And yet, it was very high protein and high sugar, but it was very natural. It's also something, though, too, to really get us thinking about who God will use. He doesn't want the perfect. He doesn't want the people who have it all together, or the big, burly, strong, as we might think about it. It's not human strength. It's God's strength that will show through.
That goes back to Moses, to Abraham.
It goes back to,
Correct.
Yep. And yet we still have this idea, because of our society around us, what does success look like? You're a big football player. You're wealthy. You're able to have power. You're able to have strength. You're able to command presence. And yet, Jesus is going with the small, the weak, the normal.
Jesus' struggle as he was talking with John the Baptist. And John telling him, I'm going to Jerusalem to confront Herod.
Why was John going to confront Herod? Do you remember?
Because Herod had divorced his wife and married his brother's wife instead.
Yep.
Divorced wives. In that culture, at that time, it was incest.
Correct.
We wouldn't think so now because they weren't blood related, but
it was. So this goes back to how it is you're thinking of things and the cultural practices of the society. So when you were married, you were considered to be joining together as one flesh for all eternity. When you did get a divorce, it was figured that you would not remarry. And so it was of the mind that you needed to stay celibate, you needed to stay single, otherwise you would be in adultery. And what we have here is a king who was, I'm going to divorce my wife and take my brother's wife while my brother still lives. And so it's seen as one flesh, one flesh, one flesh. How is that going to work? And so it was very much an understanding of you're spitting in the face of God. You're taking the law, the traditions of who it is we are as God's chosen people and throwing it out the window. And yet there's a struggle there.
I think that Jesus knew that he would never see John.
He did.
He was saying goodbye without actually telling John he was saying goodbye.
So we see in Jesus's face the tears. When he says goodbye to John the Baptist, he doesn't say just goodbye. He also says, I love you. He gives him a big hug and sends him away. But you're right. Jesus gives the impression that he knows what's going to happen, but he does not tell John what's going to happen to him there. It begs the question, though, if you knew someone you loved was going to die, but you couldn't stop it because you know it needed to happen, or they wouldn't let you stop them, would you say anything?
I was always of the impression that John had to die before Jesus' ministry could really kick off and escalate. He had to get out of the way.
Yep.
And the way to do that
was to have him killed, or
well,
yeah, he would be dead before Jesus was really able. It'll be interesting to see where the story unfolds. Will this be the spark that really fans the flame of Jesus's ministry? There is also an understanding there too of, is there a shadow of time, as in John the Baptist has his time, and then Jesus will have his time as you're talking? There's
always been my impression.
Sure.
From teachings in Scripture.
Coincidentally, though, it's never really stated, though, that he must die.
No.
But it is this understanding of that there's one prophet, now there's another prophet. Can there ever be a prophet at the same time? There is prophets that do happen at the same time. One in the southern kingdom and one in the northern kingdom, in Judah and in Israel, in the Old Testament. But they're very few. I think there's 2. But it also lends us to another question. How and when do we become a disciple? Jesus seems to be waiting for an opportune time, for the right time, for things to be put together, for things to be happening, because as he said to John, he's a planner. I have to get my ideas organized. I have to have things ready and prepared. And yet John comes to him or turns around and says to him, I say whatever on the top of my mind. And Jesus says, yes, I know.
How did that work out?
Yep. How did that work out when you said, oh, you brood of vipers? Do you know how a brood of vipers are born? And John goes, absolutely, I do. They're born from their mother by consuming their mother and growing from her. I thought it was rather elegant. And Jesus says, yes. And yet the enemies that you would make from it. And he says, I am not here to make friends, but to preach the word, to give the word. Jesus seems to be preparing, though, for something much larger, something much greater. Do you remember what words he was practicing or rehearsing before Simon Peter comes in? I did today. And this was not coincidence. I didn't plan this. This is all the Holy Spirit. What about salt? If salt loses its saltiness, how? And Jesus could not figure out. Yeah. He struggled with the words. How can the meaning, the metaphor, the imagery, how can this really tie in? How can this be powerful? What are those simple phrases that we can really carry in our hearts, in our minds, and in our lives that might actually stick with us? We still do this today. What would Jesus do?
He was considering his audience.
He was.
In that most of them were going to be peasants, uneducated.
Yes, he was going for the populace. He was going for the people, not the well-educated. Absolutely.
But at the same time, he also knew that what his words would do to those that were educated and in positions of power.
Yes.
I mean, he was going to look at the political plotting that Shmuel and his teacher were doing.
Mm-hmm. So in the midst of all of this, we also have some of the what's that?
Undercurrent.
The undercurrents happen. The things that are also transpiring. Since we're in season 2, there have been now, 14? No, 13 episodes. The story is beginning to unfold, and yet the lessons are still unfolding for us. We don't always know what, why, how, and there might even be still something that we miss. How did this episode end? Do you remember?
The secret place, wasn't it?
The what?
The secret place.
The secret place.
The campground.
The campground where they're staying? Yeah.
He said Simon and Matthew off to fetch Mary.
And they go into Jericho while the others are at the camp. That's where it ends. We're left wondering. And sometimes in life, we're left with wonderment. We're left with some questions. What's going to happen next? How is this going to affect others? What is this going to mean? What is this going to do for others? I wanted you to think about that, because we have 2 that are going out and doing the work, and yet we have others that are gathered around the campfire, keeping the home fires burning, so to speak, keeping things together. Both service, but in different ways. Any other questions or anything that you were still struggling with from the episode?
The most disturbing part of this episode was the man with the demons.
Sure. Yeah, that can be hard, especially if you were standing right in front of him.
Right, or just jumps down in front of you.
Yep. Yeah.
I don't think that Atticus is done with the shed either.
Atticus is still in the shadows, a Roman man who's investigating. He's still fixated on Simon the Zealot, thinking that he is going to be the assassin that he is trained to be. But now wondering, okay, there's Simon, who's he with? I don't know him. The baptizer? What's he doing here?
Well, he knows that Jesse was healed by what both of them considered to be the Messiah.
Yes.
So Simon was going to try and track down the Messiah.
Yep.
But I think Atticus was surprised that the baptizer was there. And
yep.
He was hiding off in the shadows, and he watched the baptizer walk away. So.
He did.
Then Simon stayed with Jesus, who I would assume that Atticus felt was the Messiah.
Atticus probably has an idea, but he doesn't know for sure. He doesn't know if this is another zealot that he's talking to and they're still searching, if they have found him, if there's a lot of unknowns there. And he's still trying to put the puzzle pieces together. The question too is, how is he thinking of the Messiah? Because keep in mind too, the Messiah for the people had many different things. A connection to God, a redeemer for the people, someone who would at long last gather an army and kick Rome out and so that the lands would be restored? Or would it be something else that they hadn't even thought of? For Rome, they were fearing the general. They were fearing that this would be the man who would unite an army and gather them to kick Rome out, and that they would need to get prepared and ready their own army.
So the question is, will Atticus stay the dedicated Roman soldier, or will he run over to Jesus' side and see the light?
Time will tell. Time will tell.
Nancy's looked ahead a few episodes. I'm discovering week by week.
That's good. It's one of those things you can watch ahead, but then it really starts playing with your mind. When did they happen? When did things happen? When to ask questions? And I think one of the valuable things too is by gathering as a group, we are able to ask each other questions. Of what did you hear? What did you see? Oh, I missed that. What does this mean? And then you're able to grow more in depth. Any other things that you still had questions about that I didn't address? Yeah.
Comment, if the two of you are interested in the chosen, could you possibly tell them how they can get to that?
Yep. So if you go online, there's an app and you just type in The Chosen, and there's an app and it's through Video Angel. And there's 2 seasons that are out right now. And so we're going through those seasons. And we already did season 1, and we're in season 2, episode 5. So if you guys want to watch and binge watch a little bit and catch up.
So you can cast it from your phone to a TV, or you can plug your laptop right into your TV with an HDMI cable and play it that way on your screen.
I will say this, some episodes are good for kids, some are not, because of some of the things that are transpiring. This episode I probably would not show to especially the small children, because there was a demon-possessed man. And so there's a lot of questions that they would come up. But at the same time too, it's up to you. If you want to wrestle with those questions with them, that might be a time too.
I would definitely recommend restraining them for the kids.
Yeah.
And if you feel it's appropriate that they can handle it, sure. It's not.
And there is one in season 1, I think it's episode 4, and it's Jesus and the Little Children, which is a really good episode. I feel like where that would be good for kids. So.
We also have the crucifixion. Was that this one or last time?
Crucifixion happened last time.
That's when the several.
So there were several thieves, And Jesus was walking into Capernaum, I believe it was, or Caesarea Philippi. Was it Jerusalem? Oh, yes, it was, because they were there for the Festival of the Booth. Yep. So yes, they were in Jerusalem, but these three men had stolen something and then were caught by the Romans. And so the punishment was crucify. And so they were there. It's the kind of the billboard power of Rome, if you will. If you go against Rome, what's that? No, that's not one for kids. I agree. So, any other questions? Were you able to find the app? Rick?
I'm not looking for the app, I just put it in the notes.
Ah, gotcha. Gotcha. Oh, okay. Oh, there is Wi-Fi here. I don't remember what the password is. So, anyway, okay. Okay.
I just wanted to make a note of this. So,
yeah,
I
absolutely.
would definitely recommend watching it on a bigger screen.
Yes.
Some episodes have the small details that you'll lose on your phone or maybe even a tablet. You just won't catch them.
Sure.
Like last week with the sewer grate.
Oh, yeah.
I saw the sewer grate and I saw him focus on it, but I didn't see the flicker of light that was in the sewers. You'll have to go back and watch it, but definitely recommend watching it on a bigger screen.
Mm-hmm.
Some of this was filmed in Texas.
So the first season, they started in filming in Texas, and I don't remember where it was. I think so. Something lake or lake somewhere. Anyway, one of our church members was actually on the cast, or they were on the set where they were helping with some of the filming. I think it was episode 2 that he was on. And then they went to Goshen, Utah to film some of it. And then some of it was also filmed in East Texas. So, as in eastern side of Texas, not in actual East Texas. So.
Yeah, that tripped me out. West Texas is in the middle of the state.
I know. It's like, it was I'll say a ploy, you know, hey, come to West Texas. This is it? Wow, I thought Texas was bigger. Oh, you're only halfway there, actually. So. Oh, that's true. If you guys want to, my card is in your bag. You can email me and I can email you the link too, if you can't find it. So. Okay. So, anything else? Nancy, I know you just walked in. We were just kind of finishing things up, but if you had any questions or things that stood out to you, your husband informed us that you had watched ahead as well. So.
Can I go back and watch it again? There's things you missed.
Oh, sure.
I just don't know why she went back, but I guess you guys had to discuss it.
Yeah, we do have Mary kind of going back into her past. And so what I just mentioned is sometimes it's easy to go back to what is familiar. And for us ourselves, that we want to stay in what's familiar and comfortable. So. Anything else? Any other questions?
I just wonder if you didn't feel worthy to stay there.
I don't think it's necessarily worthy. I think it's being confronted with your past, getting all of those emotions, all of those experiences coming back and rushing over you. You just, I'm never going to escape it. And so I think it was more that. And we'll see what happens in the episodes ahead. If she's able to overcome it by herself, who's going to come and find her and help her get free? Or what is it that's going to be there? So. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. I'll just remind you too, if you see anyone else who normally comes, hey, give them a nudge and say, we missed you on Sunday. So, all right.